Hi, welcome to Lecture 6 with a special cameo by my cat. This is Booley. In Lecture 6, we're going to introduce and explain the social media post and analysis assignment, as well as introduce the principles of graphic design for social media. These are the principles you'll need in order to complete this project to the best of your ability. So in this project, you're going to think about your academic argument paper, and you're going to choose just one idea from that argument paper that you think might be interesting or helpful for some audience on social media to know about. Then you are going to compose a social media post that has to include a unique visual that you create. So you might use some existing images or some existing things, but you need to combine them in some ways to do something yourself. And don't worry about that. We are going to learn, hopefully last week you've completed some tutorials on how to use Adobe Express or Adobe Illustrator to start creating some of these graphics. If you're aware of other programs such as Canva or other apps, you're welcome to use those. But you're going to have to design that to go along with the post. So you'll think about what platform works best for your post. If you've written about Instagram, but you want to use TikTok to get your argument across, I can understand that, but you might want to pair up. If you did write about TikTok, you might want to use TikTok, etc. Then you want to say, how am I going to communicate one of those major ideas? What is the message going to be? Who's the audience? You're going to create that post. And then the second part is you have to write a large explanation, so between 250 and 50 words, answering all of these questions. Why did you choose this platform? Who is your audience? How'd you create the visual? Why did you choose all of these things that you did in the visual? Why do you think it's going to be effective? And how are some reasons that it might be not effective? What are some things that limit the possibilities for your post? So at the end, you'll finally turn in either screenshots or links to the actual Instagram post, or you're going to, it doesn't have to be like on Instagram. You could say here would be the image and here would be the caption. And then you need to include that 250 to 500 word analysis. So when you're thinking about this project, you can think about it as if you are speaking from your own voice, or you can imagine that you are creating a post for a group or an organization. So maybe you have a pretty strong personal brand, or maybe you want to start thinking about, what is my personal brand going to be? Something that I use in my job application material, something that I use to make myself stand out as a potential employee, as a potential community member, something like that. So you can use that or start thinking about what colors, what images, what vibe works best with you. Or you can imagine that you are creating this post on behalf of some other organization, maybe a UAB group, maybe at the UAB Counseling Center or something like that, maybe a community group, maybe a business. So you are welcome to think about this post either from your own perspective and your own lens, or from the lens of a different organization. And then the message is going to need to be something from your argument paper. It doesn't have to be obviously the whole thing. It just needs to be one element, because you can't communicate an entire paper in a single post. You could include multiple ideas, but if that's the case, you might want to consider multiple different posts, or maybe using video format. You also have to include a unique visual. It has to be something that you design from scratch. While you may incorporate other existing elements, you have to be the person that puts it all together. And Express and Illustrator are just choices. You can use anything. And then in the analysis, you're explaining what you did. So let's talk about, how do you design for social media? The first thing, you have to choose what your message is, and you have to know your audience. So those are the first things. You can't start saying, I'm going to do an Instagram post or whatever, before you know what you're actually trying to say and to whom you're trying to say it. And then next, you want to go ahead and say, okay, if I'm doing this from the perspective of an existing business or organization, what are the colors and images and things that I need to use from that brand? Or if it's you, what are going to be those elements that of your brand? And you're gonna start using that. So we're going to cover 4 major elements of design for this lecture. First is type. That means like the font. What do the words look like? The next is color. Next is image. And finally, we'll discuss layout. So let's start with this example. Imagine that this pops up on on one of your social media feeds. How do you feel about this? What's going on here? Where is your eye drawn? And when I use this example in class, a lot of people are like, my eye is drawn to this middle thing here, but then it just kind of stops because it's really quite busy. We have a ton of different fonts going on. We have a lot of words and clutter. We have some colors that sort of work together. I like the green and the orange, but like the orange and the yellow are a little bit too hard to see together. It's really difficult to get a clear idea from this very cluttered, very overwhelming image. So let's think about how we can use those 4 design principles, 4 design elements to improve this and make this a better, more interesting and easy to grasp the message of this post. So first, let's start with the concept of type. And I wanted to introduce to you these concepts, these pretty basic concepts of type. So serif and sans serif are something you're going to hear a lot about type. A serif is this little wing, this little piece that comes out from a letter. So some fonts are ones that have these things called serifs. But you notice that whenever you have sans serif, sans is the word for without in French, sans means it doesn't have those serifs. So you've noticed that like Times New Roman does this, whereas an Arial type does this. So there's a distinction between when it's appropriate to use serif and when it's appropriate to use sans serif in some design. You also have some more like elaborate kinds of type. This is called script, where it's quite exaggerated. And then you also have within script, you have these slab serifs and display. So these are kind of these more showy fonts. So when we're deciding what type to use, we want to match the font to the mood that you're trying to create. And you also want to match it to the context. So if you've noticed, when you are using social media, you're often using a small phone and the screen is small. So honestly, sans serif has been found to be easier to read on a small screen. If you want to look at some good sans serif fonts, take a look at this link whenever you have access to the course slides. You also want to match your fonts to the audience. So if you have light text on a dark background, that's a little bit more challenging for older readers. So if you're trying to target an older audience, you might want to reject that. If you have a Roman serif and you're creating a lot of type and it's quite a bit of text, that is the easiest for people to read. So that's why we use Times New Roman so often, is because it's a very easy text to read quickly and legibly. So another way to use font in design is to use more than one in a design, but to do so in a way that is calculated. So when you use 2 different fonts in a design, it really does create a pleasant contrast, and it helps readers distinguish between different ideas. So you might want to use one font for one idea and one for another. It helps navigate through the information, and it can bring attention to interesting facts. So when you are looking for the right combination between types, it's good to go for opposite ones. So if you notice that this one, the title is a serif font, and then the kind of subheading is a sans serif. So you're doing these kinds of contrasts here. You can notice that these are some good contrasting examples, so you can get a sense for what looks good together. You want to make sure that you use one in a more prominent way and one kind of in a more utilitarian way. You don't want to use fonts that are super similar. You want to make sure that they have a good contrast. And then once you know how you're using one, don't use it in different ways. So if one is just for the title, leave it for the title and not for the text below. Now let's talk a little bit about color. So again, you want to start with whatever colors come from an organization if you're working from within that organization, or whatever colors you've chosen from kind of your personal brand. Otherwise, though, you want to consider perhaps color psychology, symbolism, pleasing palettes. So when we're talking about color psychology, we'll kind of look at that in just a moment, and symbolism, you're thinking, what is the message of my post, and how can I match the color of my message to my message itself? So if the message is like a big warning, maybe you don't want to consider soothing blues. Maybe you want some yellow in there, some big vibrant colors. Then you can also look at how to use, let's not do that. Let's go to, it's not letting me get away with that. So we're going to go on to the next slide. We're going to use the color wheel. And this is a video that you can watch that gives you a really great introduction into how to use that color wheel. It's extremely helpful, and it breaks it down. It says, how do I create color palettes using this color wheel that are going to create complementary schemes and be really useful for my designs? Here is just a quick chart. You can find things like this many places, but it talks a little bit about both the symbolism and the psychology of colors. So imagine you are having a kind of happy sort of message that you want to send. You're thinking about maybe yellow. If you're thinking more about some serious information and you want to speak about, something more natural, you're looking at browns. So this is a way that you can, if you're totally at a loss for what colors to start with, maybe think about the symbolism and the psychology of the colors and what your message is and how to match those two. So I wanted to give some examples of a very, very colorful design. This one uses a ton of colors, but it's because their message is about designing things, right? So they want to demonstrate that they're open to diverse kinds of things. They have a lot of creativity. So they're using all of the colors in this actual beautiful design here. It's like the base is green, but then you get all these wonderful other colors that come together to create this particular design. But then contrast that design with this. Here we have just black and white and brown. It's very stark, but in a way, to me, since it's talking about natural, right? It's looking at what is totally naturally occurring. It's a very earth color to have this brown, right? And then black and white. And it's simple. It's a very simplistic design to underscore the way that this is a simple food. It's an all natural food. So you see the contrast between these colors here, where it's like quite busy, there's a lot going on, but it's because it's literally the message is about design and creativity, whereas this one is much more plain, but it's because the message is about the naturalness of this food that they're trying to sell. So this is just some examples of how color gets used. Now, the next element is images, and there are lots of ways you can create images for your designs. You obviously can move with photos, use photos. You can take your own photos. You can also take from stock photos. And if you're looking for really high quality images to use in your designs, going to Google Images is a bad idea often because the pixelation is bad. It's not very high resolution. So if you go to, sometimes we have access to Adobe Stock through UAB Creative Cloud, but Unsplash, Smithsonian Open Access, and Openverse, all of these are linked in the slides. They are great resources for finding free images that you do not have to pay for to use. Then also you can illustrate. If you are very good at art, you can do some of this hand-drawn art or digital art as well. So let's talk about layout. This is a more complex feature. So once you know what colors, once you know what images, now you have to figure out how do I move them around in the little space that I have in social media to make it a pleasing design. So you can start with existing layouts that are sort of already within Express or Canva. Or you can use your own creativity to create the layout for where you're going to put the different things. So the golden ratio and the rule of thirds are really easy ways to approach a layout design. So if you want to learn more about the golden ratio, you should take a look at this wonderful YouTube video. It's quite quick and you can get a good sense for how that works, which basically means it's never that you're going to just put a visual space in half or make it, equal parts so each part is equally represented. You can look at how there's a pleasing way to break up the space using the golden ratio. But the rule of thirds is also an easy one to take a look at, and it just demonstrates that if you divide space in three as opposed to right down the middle and half or into quadrants, you create a much more pleasing space. So you notice that within each plane, you have a whole different image within these thirds. So using that as a tactic for creating your visuals is going to make it look more sophisticated, make it look more pleasing to the eye, make your audience more attracted to it and linger on it for longer. So the other thing you want to do with layouts is not clutter the space up so much. So do you remember that early example we looked at, that orange and yellow and green recycling image? There was no blank space. Sometimes you're going to need to use that blank space. So obviously you're going to have normal amount of white spaces between different letters, but sometimes you have large blank or white space that's framing content. And that's pretty good sometimes. If you have wide margins, it's good to give people's eyes some place to rest and not be so cluttered. It's difficult to do within social media because it's such a small space. Often, if you use lots of white space and just sparse images throughout, that creates a kind of luxurious feel. So if you're going for a luxurious mood, you might want to use more white space. Now, how do you actually put all this together in design? Well, you're going to create your layout and then position your text and images within that layout. And my suggestion is that you just kind of have a pad and paper or a tablet and a marker, and you just do a series of sketches to see where should I move this? Or you have the actual visual space and you're moving your images and text around to see what looks best. Generate several sketches of what you might do. Maybe allow just 30 seconds between each. Also imagine, where do I want my viewer's eye to go first? If you want it to go straight to the top left, then create something compelling at the top left. If you want it to start kind of in the middle and branch outward, create it in that way. So once you figure out where you want all the things, start adjusting different things to create that visual path. You can do that by contrasting element, by creating emphasis in some places, and moving those things around so that your eye moves to it more quickly. Another set of tips for designing visuals for social media is to use very strong graphics, but to avoid a ton of text. Because remember, these are small images, they're often on mobile screens, and if you clutter it up with too much text, your readers and your viewers, your audience is just not going to be able to get the information that they need, and it's not going to be an effective design. You also want to make sure that the image you use is not so detailed that once you make it small, it's hard to see what's going on. You want that image to be powerful. You want to keep things uncluttered and simple to achieve focus on the subject. And then you want to make sure that whenever you flip it, it works in both vertical and horizontal. So I want to give you an example of a first draft that one of my students did for their project. And I had a lot of comments about this. My main one was that this is very cluttered and it's hard to get all of the good information on such a small screen. This was supposed to be for Instagram. I also noticed that the colors were a little bit difficult to read, that we might need some stronger blacks because of this light background, and we needed a little bit help seeing it. So while I could continue to revise this, I think there are some things that we could do better here. This already begins to make it better she decided to take this and make it into two different posts that you flipped through on Instagram, and that helps us see it better. I still think that there is some work we can do. I like that she's using a variety of different fonts, and I generally like the color scheme, but I think we need at least one more color that helps create some contrast. Then we had this was another example, a student who was talking about using Twitter to get recruited, or using social media to get recruited for sports. And this was a first draft, and there's so much going on here. There are lots of good ideas, but again, it's one of those where my eye doesn't really go anywhere yet. So he also decided to declutter and to make multiple ones that you could flip through. And here was the first attempt at the revision. I think that if I were to improve this even further, I would like to move these elements around. So maybe move the image to kind of the corner and move this to up at the top, maybe use 2 different fonts. And so the layout maybe needs to be a little bit more dynamic, but you already see that the revision helped so much to go from complete clutter here to a much clearer one set of images and one clear message here. Or an attempt at a clearer set of messages. So hopefully this gave you some ideas of how to get started thinking about how to design for social media posts, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with.